Hey everybody, this is our next section of notes over the contraction process. So we're going to be looking at the microscopic level in terms of what is happening inside our muscles as they go through contraction. All right, your essential question for today is, what is the significance of acetylcholine in a muscle contraction? We know from our vocabulary that acetylcholine is a neurotransmitter, but what part does it play in a muscle contraction? As we go through the notes, you will be able to answer that question. Make sure you write small today. I'm sure you guys are learning from these notes that we've been doing over the muscular system. There's a lot of information. This may take up to 2 pages. All right, here we go. Alrighty, so the proteins of muscle, which you learned from your protein tree that you worked on as an activity, we know that there are several proteins that are involved in muscle. That's why it's always recommended to eat or consume protein products to give you strength in your muscles, okay? So this first protein we're going to discuss is actin. Actin is a thin filament protein, okay? And the thin filaments they include actin, troponin, and tropomyosin. All right. The actin are these little like yellow balls that are in this particular illustration. The troponin is this molecule right here, and the tropomyosin is kind of what's stringing all of them together. All right. The myosin bonding site on each actin molecule is covered by myosin, in the relaxed muscle. And then the thin filaments, they're held in place by Z lines. Okay, so these Z discs and Z lines, this is what holds everything together. Alrighty, if you recall the little activity we had in our notebook where you had to fill in the letters that were listed, you might want to reference that at this time. Go ahead and pause the video and check to make sure that you did the labeling correctly. Alright, so back up here. From one Z line to the next is a sarcomere. So from this Z line to this Z line, we see this entire thing is a sarcomere. All right, the next protein that we're going to discuss is titin, okay? Titin anchors thick filaments to the M line and the Z disc, okay? So right here's the M line and the Z disc, and they're going to be anchored together. The thick filament is going to be anchored by the titin protein. The portion of the molecule between the Z disc and the end of the thin filament can stretch to 4 times its resting length and spring back unharmed. Okay, so it kind of looks like a spring in the illustration here. So as the muscle fibers, as these fibers and filaments are sliding past each other, this titin filament can stretch and then elastically come back to its original position without being harmed in a normal contraction. Okay, and the role in recovery of the muscle is occurring because of the titin molecule, this protein. All right. Some other structural proteins include the M line. The M line is made up of myomycin. It connects to the titin and adjacent thick filaments. Okay, so this M line is made up of myomycin proteins. Nebulin, which is an inelastic protein, it helps align the thin filaments. Okay, so between like where the tropomyosin is kind of anchoring the actin, the actin and the troponin molecules, you've got these other little proteins in here, the nebulin proteins, which are kind of holding things together. They're aligning everything in the thin filament. And there's also dystrophin. Okay, dystrophin is in here, and it links to the thin filaments to the sarcolemma, which remember is the membrane of the muscle cell, and transmits the tension generated to the tendon. Okay, so this dystrophin, this is kind of an interesting illustration. The dystrophin acts as an anchor for the sarcolemma, and which is the muscle cell membrane, to the connective tissue, to the tendon. All right. Now, we're going to look at the mechanism of contraction. Notice what's happening here. This is a simple illustration of 4 different sarcomeres kind of stacked together. The thin filaments and thick filaments are going to slide past each other. So when they're together, it's a contraction. Going apart is a relaxation. Okay, the myosin cross bridges pull on the thin filaments. Okay, so the cross bridges are pulling on the thin filaments, bringing them in. The thin filaments slide inward. The Z discs, which are these lines out here that keep moving back and forth, they come toward each other. The sarcomeres shorten, the muscle fiber shortens, therefore the muscle shortens. Okay, that's a contraction. Notice here that the thick and thin filaments do not change in length. What they do is they grab hold and slide past each other. They kind of grab a hold of each other and pull each other closer. All right, for the contraction. All right, so how does the contraction begin? All right, here we go. In order for your muscles to contract, this has to happen. The first thing we see happening is a nerve impulse reaches an axon, which is the end of the neuron. It reaches that axon terminal and the synaptic vesicles to release the neurotransmitter acetylcholine. All right. The acetylcholine diffuses to receptors on the membrane or the sarcolemma, and the sodium channels open and the sodium ion rushes into the cell. Okay? Then a muscle action potential spreads over the membrane, over the sarcolemma, and down to the transverse tubules. Okay? Then the sarcoplasmic reticulum releases the calcium ion into the sarcoplasm. And the calcium ion binds to the troponin and causes the troponin-tropomyosin complex to move and reveal the myosin bonding sites on the actin. Then the contraction cycle begins. Okay? So before anything in the muscle fiber begins to move, what we have is the release of the neurotransmitter, which causes a release of the sodium ion, okay, into the cell, which causes the release of the calcium ion, which causes a transformational change to the troponin-tropomyosin complex, enabling the myosin bonding sites to be open on the actin. Okay? And the contraction cycle, this repeating sequence of events occurs, and then it causes the thick and thin filaments to move past each other. There are 4 steps to the contraction cycle. First, there's ATP hydrolysis. Next, the attachment of myosin to actin to form the cross bridges. Then, similar to an engine, there's a power stroke. And lastly, the detachment of the myosin from the actin. This cycle keeps repeating as long as there is ATP available and high calcium ion near the thin filament. Okay? If these 2 things begin to break down, we will see that there are some other issues going on. Okay? This little thing here from Adams Medical is that most headaches are caused by muscle contraction or blood flow problems. So for instance, if you happen to not have enough fluid in your system because you haven't been drinking enough water throughout the day, you may end up with a headache because you don't have enough fluid in there, causing blood flow problems. Okay, another thing could be maybe you had to squint a lot because you couldn't see what was happening in front of you. That caused the muscles in your face and around your head to be tense or contracted for a long period of time. That can give you headaches as well. All right, so see it in a bigger way, the contraction cycle. The myosin heads are hydrolyze the ATP, and they become reoriented and energized. Then the myosin heads bind to actin, forming these cross bridges. Okay, so this is a myosin head. It's binding to the actin. Remember, those little yellow things are actin. All right, and the myosin heads rotate toward the center of the sarcomere. That's the power stroke. Okay, so this thing moves toward the center. And as the myosin head binds ATP, the cross bridges detach from actin. All right, and notice how the myosin head attaches and pulls on the thin filament with the energy released from the ATP. That is the important thing right there. Oops, that's our next essential question. So Yeah, make sure you guys go back, answer the essential question regarding acetylcholine, and we will discuss this contraction cycle in a little bit more detail when we complete our contraction process activity. Pay attention to these words such as myosin and hydrolysis, ATP, calcium ion, actin, and the different proteins that are involved. All right, I'll see y'all later. Have a great day.